So, hi everyone. I would like to welcome all the attendees of this session. And it's now time to introduce Dr. Pavitra Pratap Singh, Professor and Associate Dean, School of Sciences and Languages, Lovely Professional University. A doctorate in management with double PG in physics and management. He has keen interest in international politics, international relations, strategic management, having a rich and diverse experience of 26 years in industry teaching, research, and entrepreneur experience. In his career, he has undertaken and supervised more than 200 academic and consultancy projects. He has presented more than 50 research papers in various national and international conferences and seminars. He has also, to his credit, 30 books and many patents and copyrights, 100 research papers in Scopus and refereed journals and publications. For his excellent contribution, he has been honored with Manufacturing Association Award by Honorable Governor of Haryana and Bharat Vidya Shromani Award from India Solidarity Council, New Delhi. I welcome you, sir, and it's
Thank you.
over to you for introduction to various other
Thank you.
guests.
Thank you, Professor Rishi. Thank you, Professor Rishi. A warm welcome to Ambassador Anil Saab. Thank you for sparing your valuable time. It's a second interaction with you yesterday, one small brief and this. I hope I'm going to be a better learned man after this interaction. I welcome wholeheartedly my mentor, Dr. Sanjay Modi ji, Executive Dean, LFBA, lovely Faculty of Business and Arts. Thank you, sir, for sparing your valuable time. We are over here to deliberate on a topic of Middle East. Middle East was a terminology we started in the around late 18th century and in early 1904. One American historiographer used it first time, the Middle East word, and basically it was to uh, explain the region between Arabia and India, and now it's a composition of almost 18 to 20 countries, and they all have their own dynamics. Around 60 languages spoken, so many ethnicities, so many religions prevailing over there. All the countries have their own issues. If I'm talking about Qatar, Qatar is having with Saudi. If our beloved Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji was in his one of his earlier visits was to Israel, and now we are seeing a problem in Israel Palestine, and the same way we can see Iran Iraq conflict always going on. Kuwait was already there, and Iranian has been again had seen a different kind of election last week, and we had seen a different kind of a political scenario emerging in Israel also. Israel Palestine into problem, some kind of a problem as usual. They were always starting from Golan Heights to Gaza and to other kind of a thing. And India has been at the center of all these because India has to maintain a kind of a diplomatic relation, first and relationships with it, and not to forget Afghanistan and Pakistan also being a part of these regions also sometimes. And so this topic is very hot and burning. We have to understand the dynamics of Middle East as well as India's relations to it and India's role into it. And for this, who better other than can be with us, Ambassador Anil ji, who has a wide uh, exposure to all these regions and in a diplomatic experience. His journey will be an example for all of us to understand how the dynamics of Middle East evolve and what is the role India has to play into it. And thank you, Professor. Thank you, Ambassador Anilji, for sparing your time. Now, to set the context, I will invite my mentor, Dr. Sanjay Modi ji, Senior Executive Dean, lovely Faculty of Business and Arts. Having although he is a man of management, but I have never seen management in. I have always seen international relations only in him. I have learned more of international relations than if I may precisely put relations with him. He is a man of logics, man of rationale, and Dr. Sanjay Modi sir kindly set the tone for this particular thing forward, so that all the scholars, all the potential students who have joined, all the faculty who are over here, we all become more enriched and learned after this. So I'll invite Dr. Sanjay Modi sir for setting the context of this particular webinar. Please, sir.
Thank you, Dr. P.P. Singh, and a very warm welcome to Ambassador Anilji for being with us. And it is such a pleasure to, if you can't visit those countries, at least you have somebody to speak about the environment there, the potential there, the risks, hazards, and whatever gains one can have by being in those countries. So it's a pleasure. I'm sure he's going to add a lot of value to today's interaction. I would just, Anilji, say a few elementary things which are my layman's understanding of the Middle East, so that you don't have to speak about elementary things and can focus on the more intricacies of the Middle East and how India needs to balance. To my mind, you see, the relationships all across the world today are functional international relations. I don't see, there has been a great amount of dilution on the basis of principles. Earlier, I think some time ago, after India achieved its independence in the, I think that was after Second World War, there were some principles which guided international relations between countries. But now I think it has turned out to be purely functional relations. You name a developing country, you name a developed country. If US invests, if China invests, if India invests, there is, India, of course, is not as, I'm using a very crude word, is not as greedy as the Western or the more developed countries. But there is definitely, a functional, a utilitarian approach to international relations. Now, India has a very large kind of trade balance with the Middle East. I think it's beyond $100 billion per year. 2/3 of India's oil imports happen from the Middle East. So India has a very great interest. A lot of investment, Indian companies are investing in the Middle East. UAE and Saudi Arabia are investing very heavily in India. But the difficult part of the relationship is, Iran and Iraq, where India is one of the largest buyers from Iran for its oil supplies, and it had to go against the US mandate to cut off all economic ties with Iran. So, but India refused to do that because it had very special economic interests at both places, and that was a very brave and very sagacious kind of a step. But at the same time, it made sure that it does not kind of offend US, because it needs US for a lot of other issues, to the extreme. So that is the balancing act. Now, and similar is the case with the, then Israel comes as another, player which brings about dynamism. If India gets very friendly with Israel, from where it is importing technology and a lot of defense equipment, then you have the risk of annoying Iran, which perhaps is not on good terms with with Israel. So that dynamic also has to be looked at. And then India's interest is expatriates, a huge, large amount of expatriates, particularly from the south, who are there in many Middle East countries, and India gets a lot of remittances from there. And the last player, I think, which brings about great amount of dynamism is Pakistan, of course, our friendly neighbor. So because India has a huge Muslim population, it has to balance its kind of relations, because it is not very friendly with Pakistan, and Pakistan tries to drum up support from the Middle East the Muslim countries for the Kashmir issue. But fortunately, with the previous governments also, but more so with this government, they have been able to get support and dilute Pakistan's kind of influence, particularly in the context of Kashmir. And Pakistan doesn't have that kind of support on the Kashmir issue from all the Middle East countries. So that brings another dynamism. But what I feel is, since the topic is about the changing dynamics, I don't know, Anilji, whether this dynamics is going to change very significantly. That's my view on it. But of course, tomorrow, if the relations between India and Pakistan thaw, there's a thaw in our relations, or there's a thaw in the relations between, say, US and Iran, perhaps things might change a little, or the Palestine-Israel issue gets a little settled, then also perhaps dynamics might change. But those are things which will go, I think we can't peep into the future. But that's my layman's understanding about the Middle East, the dynamics of Middle East. And I'm sure you would throw a little more light on the intricacies of the issue. And it will be a pleasure to listen to you today on this issue. Thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you, Professor Sanjay Modi sir. Thank you for setting the tone. You have very rightly said that India has got huge stakes with all these Southeast Asian countries, whether it is Israel's defense or it's the fuel from Iran or something. And definitely they are contributing something to climate, where John Kerry has been put as a special ambassador by President Joe Biden to understand the climatic changes also. So because Middle East is heavily dependent on petroleum, so what their contribution is towards climate, whether it's positive or negative, that also needs to be taken care of. And these all are the changing dynamics, whether it's the international relation, whether it's the living standards or something. Thank you for setting the tone, Dr. Sanjay Modi sir. Now I will invite the person who has helped me out in this, Dr. Vinod Seeley, and definitely under the stewardship of Dr. Kiran, who is not well, he's not around over here. Dr. Vinod Seeley, kindly over to you to introduce our esteemed guest, Ambassador Anil, the Ambassador of India to Jordan, Libya, Malta, and also the Secretary of Association of Diplomats. I invite you, Dr. Vinod, to kindly formally say a few words about Ambassador Anil.
Unmute yourself, Vinod. Unmute yourself.
Vinod, I think you are.
Yeah. Respected Anil Trigunai sir, Head of the Faculty, Professor Sanjay Modi sir, Head of the School, PP Singh sir, my Head of the Department, Kirandeep sir, Professor Rishi Chopra sir. It is a great privilege for me to welcome our Ambassador Anil sir today, because he is the person who has served in most part of his career in the Middle East. So he is the right person to talk about the emerging dynamics in the Middle East and India's option. On behalf of the lovely Professional University and School of Humanities, I welcome you today, sir. And Ambassador Anil Trigunai sir served in the Indian missions in Bangladesh, Mongolia, USA, Russia, Sweden, and Nigeria. And he has also served as a Deputy Chief of Mission in the rank of Ambassador in Russia. He was also the Ambassador to Libya, Jordan, and High Commissioner to Malta. He is a regular contributor and commentator on foreign and economic policy and education and interfaith dialogue related issues. Ambassador Trigunai sir is a distinguished fellow and head of West Asia Experts Group at the Vivekananda International Foundations, members of the Governing Council, Raisina House, and Indian Forum for Public Diplomacy, Future Billionaire Network International Network, and the India-Japan Foundation, visiting fellow and advisor at the Asian Institute of Diplomacy and International Relations and Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement. He is also the Secretary of the Association of Indian Diplomats for the former ambassadors. And he is also recently joined the International Advisory Council of the Confederation of Indian Industries, and he is also the board of advisors of BRICS, Chamber of Commerce and Asia Africa, Chamber of Commerce, as well as honorary member of International Trade Council Brussels. I'm not going to explain, to introduce so much, because he is having a long years of career as a diplomat. He is a person who has excelled in the Middle East, as he served major part of his diplomatic career in Middle East. So I think we all are, eagerly waiting to listen from him. So I would like to give time for him rather than spending on introducing. Thank you, sir. Please, if sir.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Vinod, for that introduction. At the outset, Honorable Dr. Sanjay Modi, Executive Dean, Mittal School of Business, Professor Dr. P.P. Singh, Associate Dean, Professor Rishi Chopra, esteemed faculty of the lovely professional university, distinguished participants, academics, and dear students. I'm so happy to see so much interest in the international affairs, especially in the Middle East or West Asia region, as we call it now, that we are going to discuss today. I have heard so much about the lovely professional university and its professionalism, commitment to quality education, and extensive outreach. I have also heard about a very intensive political science and international relations program that you conduct. Having a core competence of international relations and expertise is indeed essential for the foreign policy making of the country and for its continued evolution. So I must compliment you and congratulate the founders and faculty for all this. And thank you, Dr. Modi, for laying out the context and contours of the complicated scenario in West Asia. I agree with you totally that there is a disjunct between functional policies and the principled approach to the policy. We know that over time, like at least in the last 50, 60 years, or since our independence, I would say, when we got out of the Second World War, we had seen the world was divided into two blocks and the Cold War was going on. Today, again, we are at the same juncture where this Cold War 2.0 is threatening to be there. So within that, the basic essential objective of every country, or the fundamental aspect of the foreign policy diplomacy of any country, is to subserve her interests. But countries like India in that context are different. And as you would have seen, and I'm not going to that because that is a little bit outside the purview of this talk, about our Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, for example, or for a vaccine diplomacy, which we are hearing a little bit of criticism about it, but this is something that is what India is all about. And that is seen across the spectrum. So there are still some principled approaches to policy rather than to brute power that prevail in the international scenario that we see today. So India has acquired a certain heft, a certain position, despite the fact that we don't have a thick checkbook like the Chinese or our northern friends or some of the Europeans or the Americans. But India has the reservoir of tremendous goodwill, and through which it operates across continents, whether it is Africa, whether it is West Asia, whether it is in Latin America or anywhere else, or for that matter in South Asia, which is a very different kind of a dynamic, which we might discuss some other time. So I'm indeed very thankful to you for this very kind invitation to share some of my thoughts on this very important geography, which is so very crucial to us. In fact, during the week, I think I was at a strategic discussion and where one of the distinguished member commented, and he says, and it was rather pertinent in my view, that why should we care about what happens in Iran, what kind of elections take place, or what happens in Israel, or for that matter in Saudi Arabia? Why should we be so much worried about that? Well, my answer to that question was simply that we put our own national interest first. It is in our own national interest, and that's why we need to be careful. This is our neighborhood, and very often I personally feel, not because I am associated with the region for nearly 2.5 decades. But uh, because of our own interest, I feel that it is even more important than our immediate neighborhood in many ways. So let us try to explore the horizons of this very premise. So what is actually happening there? Let us just discuss a little bit. And so to do that, let us look at which are the countries which are the major actors or the vectors in the region. For example, you spoke about Saudi Arabia, we spoke about Iran, we speak about Israel and Turkey. These are the 4 countries which are really moving the dynamic within the region. And then you have the ambitious ones like the UAE and Qatar. On the other hand, you have countries like Oman and Kuwait, which are basically the balancers, which try to have good relations with every country. And they try to diffuse the crisis within the Gulf Cooperation Council. I have mentioned about Gulf Cooperation Council because the power and heft of big powers earlier, like the GC, like Egypt or Iraq or Syria, is really not there anymore, which can influence the outcomes within the region. Of course, Egypt is trying to flex its muscles, but Turkey is one country which has emerged above all these countries. Of course, what will happen in the region will be very dependent on how United States looks at it, how US is invested in the region. And that really dictates the paradigm shift into the way things are happening in the region, and they have always done. Because USA has been the arbiter of security in the region from the Second World War, or from the time these countries became independent, or they became oil rich, because that's what the interest of the US. And during the Second World War, the major interest for the US was somehow to remove the governments which were trying to go towards the Soviet Union. Now, that was the major reason of the Cold War that prevailed in that. So we did not see a great Soviet influence from the 70s onwards in the region. But today, what we see is that Soviet Union has gone, but Russia has emerged as a strong power. And the Russia tried to intervene in Syria in 2015. And that is when Russia started flexing its muscles. It had the first, one of the famous Tartus base in Syria, and therefore it is stabilized, much against the wishes of the Western world. It is stabilized Assad regime, and which still today is continuing after 10 years. So that's what we are saying. So that shows that in the region, Russia has become a major political power, not only in the United Nations Security Council, but physically. It has good relations with Saudi Arabia. It has excellent relations with Iran. It has very good relations with Qatar or UAE and all the countries. And in fact, is selling even the equipments to them. And of course, with Egypt and others, they already have traditional relationships. On the other hand, China is another country which also dictates because of its economic health. And it has started, as you all know, it has started in 2013, something called BRI, or One Belt, One Road initiative. Now, that was something that was going along the region. So Middle East, very few people know that China has become extremely well embedded in the region with all the countries. We only hear about some deal with Iran, $400 billion and all that. But we are not looking at the relationship that has expanded with Saudi Arabia or with Israel or with UAE. For example, its first vaccine was created, is being manufactured now outside China, is in UAE. And now it's in Egypt, the second place. So it has become economically, and apart from the infrastructure and all these things which are often talked about, it has started on a very different long-term project, which is called Health Silk Road, which is related to only health dimension, or Digital Silk Road, DSRI. So this is all continuing with all the countries. And since the next, as all of you know, that what we are going to see in this later part of the century or during now onwards is the artificial intelligence driven, technology driven growth in all the countries. So what is happening in the region right now is that most of the countries, after the Arab Spring 2.0 that we have seen is again playing out. Arab Spring, you all know, in 2010 December it started, and then 2011 a lot of governments fell. Starting from Tunis it started, then it went to Egypt, and from Egypt to Libya to Syria, and Yemen, and all these countries are suffering. Today we are seeing again, after 10 years, when these hotspots continue to remain there, which have the possibility of destabilizing And when we have seen the top leaders who were there for 30, 40 odd years, like Gaddafi, like Mubarak and Ben Ali, they were removed by the public discontent from these regions. We saw that somehow in the countries like in the GCC, which are rich, oil-rich countries, these monarchies were able to manage to stay afloat through the doles, through trying to assuage their population, trying to provide them some kind of reforms or promising greater reforms. So today we see Saudi Arabia talking of 2030 vision, which means, or for that matter, the Emiratis or the Qataris, everybody is trying to talk of certain kind of reforms. And these reforms are not only political sector, these are the reforms which are the social sector. For example, in Saudi Arabia, it was virtually impossible for a woman to go alone somewhere or travel outside or to go to a gym or to drive a car. Today, all this is changing. It was not possible to have theaters in the country, but today everything is changing there. They are not only that, but Saudi Arabia is also building a city called on the Red Sea, which is in that city, they are trying to build $500 million. They're investing in that and trying to build it into a modern city where people can come and enjoy themselves. They are projecting the Indian Bollywood industry to come and shoot there. So they are changing their whole concept. Secondly, most of these countries which are oil rich are moving from the oil economies because we know that oil is a fungible asset. It has a certain lifespan, and within 40, 50, 60 years, all the oil will not be there. But until then, the countries like India and China and South Korea and Japan will continue to depend on the oil and gas supplies from this region. And that is what brings this region to closer proximity to most of us in Asia, let us say. Europe is also a part of it, but Europe has different supplies from Russia, from other countries in the region. So what we see that West Asia sits over a geographical and strategic center of the world, where region possesses more than 40% of hydrocarbons. And it is that's why we see a lot of geopolitical and convergences or competitions. That's both happening. We are also seeing that the global maritime trade routes, whether it is a Strait of Hormuz or Bab el-Mandab, they all pass through. 60, 70% of the trade passes through that. So, or also the crude supplies to the rest of the world. Today, USA is no longer interested in the Middle East because it has itself become an oil-rich country and giving a competition to all of them. And in fact, has been supplying even to India. So what we see today is that the US's interest, as far as the strategic location is concerned, is very much predicated on ensuring the security of Israel. That has been a primary reason. And secondly, for its partners, that supply of oil and gas and other things remains continuing. And thirdly, how to contest with China and Russia's growth in the region. So that is the US policy. And we have seen that what Trump did was, we might say it was more on a Twitter diplomacy or something. But at the end of the day, what we see them doing was they were trying to really come to change the whole complex of the region because they could not stay here. They want to get out of the region or withdraw gradually by keeping the strategic forces. Because they have almost 12 or 13 bases within the Gulf only, and 24 bases in Turkey. So it is very important to see that what is the US interest. So US interest basically decides exactly which way these countries' security. So now that when these countries in the region are looking at a possibility that US is slowly withdrawing, so they have begun to look for other partners. Who are the other partners? There are only two at the moment, or three at best. Number one is China. China is quietly doesn't care what kind of regime you have, what is your internal political system. It only believes in serving its own ends through economic engagement mainly, and try to get the ports and other infrastructure projects so that eventually it can weaponize those if needed. So that has been the Chinese. It has slowly worked under the umbrella and under the radar of the American security system. So far prevailing, it does not at the moment wish to replace the American security architect. Russia, on the other hand, has very close relations with these countries. It is also looking at them because it's an oil-rich country itself. So therefore, it works in the system of oil producers and exporting countries, OPEC. So it is part of the OPEC plus. So it decides on the supplies of the oil and gas, and therefore it is extremely important in that region for that. So it's looking at the market, and if the turn comes, then China and Russia will like to work together in the region as well. So that is something. Now, very often we say that Israel is extremely close to the United States, so it should not be doing business with China, but that's not true. In fact, China has been able to secure the Israeli support for its BRI project. It has also been working with them in technology domain, which is the real strength of Israel. And then it is also working with them, developing their ports, their water supply systems, and all kinds of things, including in the healthcare sector during this period of time. Now, so we are looking at it that in the region, so much of development is taking place. At the same time, what we are seeing that the Syria remains a conflict zone, and there is a problem. And everywhere where you will see, the problem is external actors, and they are the ones. And regime change has been one of the agendas. One of the things I would like to talk about Libya. I have served there as ambassador in the post-Gaddafi era. I mean, that country after 10 years is now trying to get somewhere. And after going through a terrible times, a terrible decade, I would say. But some countries like Lebanon today are suffering because of the same thing. The people's aspirations are not being met. Algeria, it is the same. They just had the election. They can't form the government. We are seeing same thing in Sudan. We are seeing, again, Tunisia was a partial success from where the Arab Spring revolution began. But today, they are having some problems. So these countries, what kind of a democracy, whether they will have a Westminster style of democracy or they will have something very different, is something to be seen. Then there is another thing that has been intra-regional competition, which is extremely important to talk about. That is between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Simply, you can say that it is a Shia-Sunni divide. But at the same time, I think it is more to do with the geopolitical or regional influence and the leadership position as well. Especially since 1979, when we had the regime, Islamic regime came to power, and this was run by Ayatollahs until today. Very recently, it was talked about by Dr. Singh about the elections that were held there. We have seen Ibrahim Raisi, another very ultra-conservative, but I feel that he is a pragmatist and looks for his country because the economy is in a terrible shape in Iran today. Inflation is at a very high, unemployment is at a big high. So therefore, his job is essentially to see to it that the discussions with the United States that are continuing and so that they can sign this nuclear deal once again with the United States and the sanctions are lifted so that the economic flows, their oil could start going out and the oil and gas they can supply and they can start going ahead with that. There is a problem with that model. That is the problem is with the Sunni Arab countries like led by Saudi Arabia and with Israel. Israel and Iran today or last 40 years since 1979 have been mutually, I would say, on a mutually destructive path. They do not want to acknowledge the existence of one or the other. Like Iran will say, I'll decimate Iran. Iran will say, I'll decimate Israel or finish them. So Iran has not only as a country, but surprisingly, the last 40, 50 years, it has also been under sanctions, except for a brief period between 2015 to 2017. And these sanctions have created some kind of a resilience in the country. And that's why I say the civilizational countries, even though they go through terrible problems, economic problems, are able to somehow sustain themselves. On the other hand, politically, it has been able to garner support through its proxies, militia proxies, whether it is Houthis in Yemen, because you know the Yemen war is going on between Saudi Arabia and Houthis are the proxies of Iran, the full support Iran provides them. Or Hamas in Gaza, for example, which is Israel and Hamas recently had a war once again. Or for that matter, Hezbollah, that is in Syria and Lebanon, which operates there. So these three H are extremely important instruments. And likewise, there are militias and which are Irani militias working in Iraq. And they are all working to see that America leaves Iraq quickly or the region as far as possible. So they are all trying to work on a situation where we can see now, but good thing has happened is that with the thing that America is going out, the most of the regional countries realize that if this deal is signed, Iran will become flush with funds and will have money at its disposal. It will become further strengthened while addressing its basic needs. And therefore, it is good time that can we have some kind of a regional security act. So they are trying to work together. We have seen that 2 or 3 meetings have happened between the Saudis and between the Iranians. We have seen that Turkey and Egypt are talking today. And we are seeing that Turkey and Saudi Arabia are talking. We are also witnessing that between Qatar, which there was a blockade, which was in 2017 by Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Bahrain and Egypt, that has been lifted. Of course, for that, a great credit goes to Trump, both for starting and for ending it. Trump, in the meantime, has done something very good. We may say whatever it is, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, was actively involved in the Middle East, and that is the only part of his foreign policy success. And that was that he created these something called Abraham Accords. Now, the word Abraham comes from the religions, three religions, Abrahamic. The Abrahamic religions are Jewish, Islam, and Christianity. So this was, he himself is a Christian, devout Christian, and the Israelis are Jews, and the Muslim world is Islamic. So that is why the name was called Abrahamic Accords, and which was signed before he left. Now, this was an accord between Israel and UAE, Israel and Bahrain, Israel and Sudan, and Israel and Morocco. Many other countries were supposed to join, and there's several of them. Saudi Arabia wants to, but Saudi Arabia is the custodian of the two holy mosques, right? So it's extremely difficult for it to do unless the Palestinian issue is not resolved. So that has been their major problem with the thing, but they have good working relationship. So does Qatar. I mean, in the FIFA, which is going to be held in 2022, they are already working with the Israelis for security and for several others. So far, it has been under the cover, but today it has come out in the open. And so therefore, they have diplomatic relations and they increase. But what has happened is the recent fight that happened between Israel and Hamas in Gaza has brought the Palestinian issue once again on the front burner and creating a little bit of a problem for these Muslim countries in the region, because the Arabian street has risen to the occasion. The monarchies, the leaders, the presidents, they would like to have normalized relations with Israel. But at the same time, the people at the grassroots level are not that keen about it. So what we are seeing is that there is a little bit of a hiatus at the moment in normalizing relations with these countries for Israel. But of course, with the UAE, its relationship has really expanded. We've already done in less than 1 year. They just opened last week their missions, and more than $500 million of trade has just happened between these two countries. So what we are looking at, another thing that we need to see is in all these countries, there has been change of government and the younger leadership has come. For example, whether it's Sheikh Zayed in UAE or Sheikh Tamim in Qatar or Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia or the Omani leader or the Kuwaiti leader or for that matter, the King of Jordan and others, they are all young leaders. They are all aspirational leaders. They want new things to do, but at the same time, they're also impatient. Earlier, they used to have this tribal council system whereby they could resolve their issues quickly at their elders level. Today, that thing does not happen and does not work. And so therefore, that is something that is going to be a challenge for most of the countries to deal with them. Exactly how it is going to work out, we don't know. Now we are seeing the Biden's policy. President Biden, he wanted to go back to the nuclear deal, which was the right thing to do, in my view, because it has created an unnecessary warlike situation with Iran. And they tried to, President Trump and others tried to put the maximum pressure tactics, the big sanctions, but all that would not work because we have seen it that it has slowed down the situation in Iran, but it has not taken away its capability. It has missiles. It has continued with the help of Chinese and the Russians and some and so on local this thing. One more country we have to be careful is that we have to be careful of Erdogan of Turkey, because Turkey is becoming a third pole of Islamic leadership. Pakistan has been supporting Turkey. They have very close relations. And therefore, what we are seeing is that Erdogan has militarized its diplomacy. It's a NATO country, for that matter. It could not become a member of European Union. It goes and buys what it, S-400, for example, like the one we are buying, the air defense system from Russia, irrespective of being on bad books of the Americans. It goes and sends its forces to Libya. It is sending its forces in Syria. It is fighting in Iraq. It goes and challenges the European Union in the Mediterranean. So I say that Erdogan's policy, one can simply say in 3 M's. One is Muslims, Mediterranean, and the Middle East. So it wants to get the leadership. And that is peculiar to Erdogan himself. He calls himself as Ottoman. He has an Ottomanic dream that it should become the same kind of country as it was. Now, so we are seeing that what has happened. Fortunately, now we have seen in Israel now this government which has come. It's a coalition government. It is like anti-Netanyahu platform, because Netanyahu has been in power for more than 12 years, and he was a hawkish person, and he was acquiring more and more of the Palestinian land, and illegal settlements were being conducted, and that has been much against the wishes of the international community and much against the agreements that they had themselves signed. So they reduced the Palestinian issue to a very small fraction, and nobody in the no country in the region except perhaps Iran has the capacity to fight the Israelis today. And so therefore, at any given time they want, and they have superb intelligence. The Mossad is one of the finest intelligence agencies in the world for taking out any of the covert programs anywhere. They have been doing it in Israel, in Iran in the recent past, and last 1 year we have seen it. Large number of cases that have happened. They have not owned it up, but they very much have the footprint or fingerprint of Mossad there. So they're continuing. But at the same time, what you are seeing now is all these countries are trying to modernize. For example, UAE has sent its first Mars mission. It has gone into the Mars mode. It is going into space. It's going to renewables. It is going to nuclear, and it is becoming a modern country. That is the fourth country which is trying to project itself as a secular country. It is saying that all the religions, for example, you know that when Prime Minister Modi went there, they gave a piece of land in Abu Dhabi to build a temple. The Pope came there. All religions, they have these World Tolerance Summit, they have Ministry of Tolerance and all kinds of things. So it's trying to project itself as a different kind of a power. While acquiring all kinds of war machine, it is also going through the soft power diplomacy in the region. But what I'm seeing, the trend that is emerging today in the region is, and if the problem with America continues, I'm seeing that there could be something which I call as cryptic, like China, Russia, Iran, Pakistan, Turkey, and Qatar on the fringe. These 5 countries could emerge into some kind of a loose alliance in case there is a problem, versus the Sunnis, that is Abraham Accord countries, plus some of the Sunni countries led by Saudis. So we might have, and supported by, of course, US and some European countries. So if the situation becomes that you are looking at something emerging in the region like that, of course, all the countries are suffering from COVID-19, and that has brought them down because they can't sell their oil, so the prices have gone down of oil in those countries. Their revenues have been lost. They have been forced to draw on their sovereign wealth funds. We had to, a lot of Indian people who are working there in the region had to come out, you know, the Vande Bharat mission flights and all. We had to bring out large number of Indians back during this period. Of course, they'll pick up the economy as they diversify, but then the nature of the people that they will require, the workforce they will require, will change tremendously. It has to be retrained. It has to be more technologically savvy, because this is what these countries are doing. They're using their money to upgrade their technological skills rather than keeping it man-centric. You know, so that is where so far we have had more than 9 million Indians who are living there, and their security and welfare is of utmost importance to the Indian government. I mean, that is one reason that we are so much invested all the time in the region. Apart from trade, apart from transit, apart from other things, that is because, see, suppose there is a war. You remember that when we had to evacuate from Iraq, and I have been involved with many of these evacuations, it is an uphill task. It's not easy to bring out 100,000 people from a war zone like we did in Iraq, or when I was in Libya, we did so many people from there through the war, because anything can happen at any minute. It's like a Rambo style operations that happen. But it requires a lot of, especially it's more difficult when these countries, governments don't work, they don't have a structure. Then it becomes a big problem in a conflict situation. So from India's perspective, that is extremely important. Large number of Indian companies are going there and setting up their operations, more than 5,000-6,000 in UAE alone, companies in their special economic zones. Now they have also started giving these gold visa schemes or the citizenship to foreigners of certain kinds, which is unthinkable to some extent. So from that perspective also, it's going on quite a lot. Now, it was mentioned also that why it's important for us. Of course, energy security. 60-70% of our oil we get from them. Second is gas. 90% of our gas comes from Qatar and other countries. Thirdly is food security, which is not known much here. Large number of these countries, we produce, get fertilizer from these countries, whether it is Jordan, where I was there, we did a project of $680 million sulfuric acid project, which is a joint venture, whether it is Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, or some other countries from where we are importing. So that's extremely important for us, from the potassium for that matter. Our market for us, it's a very important market for us. It's a very good transit point for us. We get about $50 to $60 billion annually, which is nearly 1/10 of your today's foreign exchange remittance, which we are getting foreign exchange reserves of India. So it's 1/10 nearly is coming from only these Middle East countries by the Indians who are there. The poor Indians from Kerala and from elsewhere who are sending 90% of their savings back to India. So they are extremely important from our perspective. Then I'm not talking about historical civilizational trade links, and that everybody knows about them. Maritime security, they are very important for us, because if whatever we are getting for the trade, so that is why India has stationed its forces, naval ships in the Gulf region, basically to protect our own ships and other ships as well against the piracy or against any other mishaps that might happen. So we are in that. Then we are talking about various countries to work not bilaterally, but also in the third countries. For example, we are talking about Chabhar port with Iran for Afghanistan or for Central Asia, which we are developing. We are trying to look at Africa in collaboration with UAE or Saudi Arabia or Israel in agricultural sector or food processing sector, or for providing them technology, apart from our bilateral expertise, which we provide, or assistance that we provide to the African countries. So we are doing all these things. Now, let me just briefly talk about India's stand on Palestine and India's relations with Pakistan that impact there before I close. Palestine is one country, we can say country now, but it is hardly a country today, but we recognize it as a country. We have even built their embassy in New Delhi. The Palestine issue has been crucial for India from day one. Even before we had our independence, Mahatma Gandhi had clearly said that as UK is for the British, France is for the French, Palestine is for the Palestinians. But after the Second World War, what happened, as you know, is that it was the British protectorate. And during the war, because they took it away from the Ottomans, and therefore it was a British protectorate. And during that time, we had seen what happened to the Jews in Germany, and they were brought in and they were settled there. And since 1948, they had their own state in accordance with the UNSC. And then there have been 3 or 4 wars between Israel and Palestine. India did not recognize Israel in the beginning at the UN because of our Muslim population, Islamic credentials, because of our interests that were required, which continued to increase over time because of dependence on oil and gas. That is extremely important, or for that matter, our diaspora presence and their contributions to India. So we continue to support Palestine fully, and we till today, we support the 2-state solution. It has been nuanced a little bit, because today you see that the Arab world itself is not so sanguine about the cause of Palestine, or there is some kind of a fatigue has set in, basically, in supporting it to the extent it is. So among the leadership, at least, in those countries, but at the popular level, you do have a tremendous support for Palestinian cause, and therefore India's relations. And I was myself in the ministry at the time when we recognized, when we upgraded our diplomatic relations with Israel in 1992. And we discussed with Arafat at that time, who was the president of Palestine, that look, this is what we are going to do. He said, we are very happy because India can use its good offices with the Israelis for bringing about some peace, right? So they looked at from this point of view, and that has been one of the roles that India has played behind the scenes, not necessarily on the front. Palestinians would want us to come out and directly come in, and so for that matter, others like Syria, Yemen, everybody prefers India to come and play a greater role, which we are not doing it for several reasons. We can go into that. Israel, when our relationship really increased tremendously, and I want to tell you this, when Prime Minister Modi took over in 2014, most of the Arab world was very, very, cagey. They're careful. They said, possibly, he will only have good relations with Israel, because even before he became the prime minister, Gujarat was a major collaboration state in agriculture and other sectors, so technology transfers with Israel. He had great relations with Netanyahu, personal basis. So everybody was under the impression that this is what happened. And I was called, in fact, and I was ambassador to Jordan at the time. And I tried to explain to them our policies don't change overnight. I mean, we have certain issues. Of course, we have great relations with Israel for our security, for defense, for cyber terrorism, against counterterrorism. So we have so many areas in which they work with us, but our relationship stands on. So you have seen something is being called now, everybody knows, de-hyphenation of India's policy between Israel and between Palestine. Earlier, what has used to happen, what will give you an idea, it was hyphenated, means if any of our leaders go into Palestine, he'll go to Israel. Or if he's going to Israel, he'll go to Palestine. Like this was something connected. When I was there, I tried to have the first visit of the Indian president to Jordan. Now that visit took place, he came to Jordan first, then went to Palestine, then went to Israel. Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj came, she also did the same thing. But when Prime Minister Modi's visit came, he went straight only to Tel Aviv. Second time he went to Jordan, and from there he flew to Palestine. He did his independent visits between the two countries, right? So that shows that we are going to take on each issue on the basis of what happens with this country, but we want them to live side by side. We want Israel to stop these settlements it's doing or using disproportionate force. And if you have followed the UN Security Council statement that India made, was very clear. It was a statement for peace, even though the Palestinians were not that happy, and so were the Israelis, because they wanted us to stand up and say, no, XYZ is wrong. But we don't have that policy. We don't do that. So it is something that most of the countries in the region, now we'll have to see how India plays out in the region by itself. Because today, at one time, if you can, those who study foreign policy and this thing, if you think about OIC, you will see that in the OIC, when we were invited in 1964 in Morocco, India was asked, Dr. Fakhruddin Ali Ahmad had led Indian delegation. And he was asked, because Yahya Khan said that, look, I cannot show my face if India becomes the member of the OIC. This is so. He went there, he was asked that, okay, you can become an observer or something, which he refused and returned. Delegation returned from there. Now, come to 2 years ago, Sushma Swaraj was invited to OIC meeting, foreign ministers meeting in Abu Dhabi, to give as a special lecture or address them, all the Muslims. Pakistanis objected to it. And the UAE said, it's up to you. If you don't want to attend, it's up to you. That was something unthinkable. That's what I want to say. So today, our relationship with these countries, I mean, same thing in the Pulwama or Balakot or JNK Article 370. These countries could have made a lot of mess earlier, at least in the public domain. But they did not. This is an internal matter of India. India is doing the right thing. They don't want, of course, to choose between India and Pakistan for obvious reasons. But they have told Pakistan and they have understood the game of Pakistan as far as terrorism is concerned. And that's a great success for India. So today, our relationship with those countries is not only buyer-seller. It has converted into a strategic partnership. Now it was mentioned that the Saudis will be investing in India. Like when Mohammed bin Salman came, he announced that $100 billion will be invested in India in different areas, including the reserves for oil and gas in India, including many other major projects. Same thing with the UAE. And as you know, during this pandemic period, $10–20 billion of investments have been made by these countries in India. I mean, if you see just the statistics of the Jio platforms of the Reliance Group, they have got more than $10 billion from these countries. So secondly, I mean, it was impossible for us to get any stakes in their oil and gas sector. We could only buy, we were not there. But for the first time, an ONGC-led consortium has been given rights in UAE. It was not possible earlier, but today it is there. Of course, we have in some other countries, but in these countries, it is important. So I think that the Pakistani factor has a nuisance value. It's no longer that relevant as far as our bilateral relationship is concerned. But I personally feel that India's biggest problem in the region will actually come from China, because our competition is going to be globally with China. And whereas America focuses more towards Indo-Pacific, and the new relationships and new dynamic and the new equations or groups or alliances develop, we will have to look at it from that. Secondly, if we want to play a role as a power, we have to move out of the orbit of bilateral to regional to global. That is extremely important. We cannot just say that, okay, what if? Now, there is no question, if you want to be a power and you want to play the power game, then what if is not the question. That costs are there, you will have to bear the cost. And the Prime Minister Modi, in fact, he has said that when he went to Iran and before that Saudi Arabia and all these countries, and he has been awarded, he has been the only Prime Minister or only leader in the world who has been given the awards by every country in the world, in the region. That was unthinkable at one time. But today we have that kind of, so that shows you the relationship. You want to know how it operated. I mean, frankly, we have these economic offenders. You are all thinking about Chokshi and Vijay Mallya and all. These guys are sitting in Europe and everywhere else and are not able to, we are not able to get them back. But anybody in UAE, for example, or Saudi Arabia, in the last couple of years, so many of them have been sent back to India. They've been captured and they've been, so that shows the relationship in operation. And that's what I wish to say. I want to say that the region has its lot of hotspots, which have the possibility of going out of hand. And if anything goes wrong in the region, India will definitely suffer a great deal, especially on our economy and our diaspora. It is extremely important for us that the stability is maintained. And if we want to maintain the stability, it is important that we play the role that those countries are looking forward. One thing I was asked by Dr. Saab that I should talk about the opportunities in Middle East. As I mentioned, that Middle East is changing very fast. It is trying to upgrade itself into a modern reformist, especially the big countries like Saudi Arabia, like UAE, like Qatar. My daughter is in Qatar and she's been there for 9 years. I can tell you that number one is that security is immense. Of course, unless you have a world war between Iran and the US or some other country, it's very unlikely. Of course, Iran shows tremendous strategic patience. But if you go to other countries, you go to Israel, I mean, there is so much to do there. There's such a vibrant country. You go to Jordan, I was out there. This is the most interesting country in the way that it has positioned itself as a hub for the Gulf and Middle East and for Europe and America. So if those who want to do business and want to set up their businesses, want to avail of the opportunities in Iraq and Syria, where the reconstruction will begin very soon, those are the places to be. Similarly, when we go to Morocco or for that matter, Bahrain or any of the GCC countries, they're all excellent places to be there. There is crime rate is very, very low, absolutely non-existent to that, because they have a deterrent law in place. If you do wrong, you get it. Secondly, the job, though even if the salary levels have come down for those who are looking for jobs, it is still several times more than what you get in India. That is for a fact. And they like Indians. The most important thing is anywhere you go, any of these countries in the Arab world you go, you will find that there is a tremendous affection for India. And that is where historic reasons. Until the 1970s in many of these countries, Indian rupee was the legal tender. And even now, we have come back to the same. We have started introducing our RuPay card. When Prime Minister went to different countries, RuPay card has been introduced there. So it is like an extended neighborhood and one of the most important regions for India. So that's where I would stop and I'll take the question. Thank you once again for this invitation.
Thank you, Ambassador Anil Saab. It was as if we were reading a book of Middle East. वो कहते हैं we say it khichdi, and second one is called chappan bhog. So today we had the chappan bhog, where we had the history of almost all the nations put together. I have been receiving messages on my WhatsApp that he seems to be an encyclopedia on Middle East. I said he doesn't seem to be. He's actually an encyclopedia. And you have very rightly pointed out the soft power which was introduced as a concept by Joseph Nye, that how the diplomatic relationships of our Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been putting the diplomatic relations into place in all these Middle East countries, and starting from Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, Oman, Iraq, Afghanistan. You have put in almost, you have given a picture of almost all the nations and how India figured into it. And thank you also for answering our mentor's point that what are the opportunities about the employment and the businesses in all these countries. And definitely your point when you say the crime rates are less and the infrastructure investments are going to be high, so that's a business and business entity, or that's a business opportunity for our budding entrepreneur students. And also when you are talking about the salaries over there are multiples of what we get in India. And a testimonial to it is your daughter being in one of these countries proves the point that there are better opportunities over there. Thank you, Ambassador Anil. I'll ask Dr. Sanjay Modi sir to ask any queries or initiative if you have. Otherwise, we'll move to questions. Sir, you will have to unmute, sir. Sir, you will have to unmute, sir.
Okay. I said after listening to him, he did not leave any scope for questions.
Very right.
It was almost a revelation, as if he had absolute. He has a an internal network on which he receives all the information about the Middle East. I think it has been absolutely illuminating. I was a little disturbed by one or two visitors, so I was distracted. But then I've enjoyed. I've got the sense of what you've said.
Thank you.
And thank you for pointing out the opportunities which are available. I think our listeners would be very keen, because today the biggest, dimension which comes into focus of the youth is where can they have a safe employment? Because Indians, either South Indians like Middle East, and North Indians are going to Australia, Canada. Canada, of course, is the first choice. But I think Middle East is a good option. It's a good option.
Yeah.
Closer home, and you can come and go. Probably a little less expensive, and because people are generally not aware of the positive things, they may be aware of the strict discipline and a couple of very unsavory, unpleasant stories which they read on social media or elsewhere in the news. So thank you for throwing light, and thank you for pointing out all the dynamics of the Middle East. I think I have no questions. All questions stand answered.
Thank you, Dr. Sanjay Modi, sir. Thank you. Rishi, sir, you have questions from this room, please, sir.
Yeah, I do have a lot of questions pouring in from all the attendees. I will start taking up. The first one is by Hadwin Charlie. So it's very specific. Please, good morning, sir. Please let me know the political policies and academic openings for professor appointments in Department of Journalism and Mass Communication for Indians in Middle East, especially Kuwait.
So employment is
very specific.
That's the concern.
Yeah, one thing I would like to say is that there are a lot of professors from Western countries, and we also have several Indian universities having their overseas campuses. And I hope that your university decides to have an overseas campus in either Qatar or in UAE. It will be very useful, because then we can have our own faculties there. The problem with the Indian professors is that you need to possibly know the Arabic language in order to be able to understand what is happening. Because see, we might see the Western media, that is very different. But in those countries, in order to connect with them, it is important to know their language. And when you are teaching journalism, for that, the language is extremely important to understand the nuances in those countries. Even their journalists, if we don't understand the dynamic there, we'll not be able to take the right decision as far as journalists will say something, will not understand it, or will report something. That is that is a bit of a limitation for our people as far as the academics are concerned. But definitely in the postgraduate courses, there are professors from Western countries. They don't know any language. They come there and they invite them there. So I think there are opportunities available. But I would say that instead of Kuwait, I would advise you to look more closely with Georgetown University or some other universities which are there in the education city. You see, these countries have set up education cities. So you must look at Saudi Arabia, which is now branching out heavily into education. You must look in Qatar. You must look at the UAE. These are the three countries right now I would recommend.
And can I add one thing here? One thing I would like to
Yes.
add. I think, when you have a situation where you have to compete with people from the West, obviously there'll be comparisons. So I would suggest that those of you who are aspiring to go to countries where the Western faculty also is very prominently visible, the rigor, academic rigor needs to be developed. So the kind of depth, in-depth understanding of the subject, one, how it gets applied on the ground, the actual ground realities of the industry, you must be familiar with. And the second dimension is the research part. You should be good at research methodology, and a lot of teaching by the Western faculty happens through their own research papers that they write. So they are very grounded people. So in case you have to look for opportunities, you will have to develop this academic rigor and research intimacy. So if you can do this, I think you can move anywhere. It's not a challenge.
Wonderful, sir. And I hope Hadwin has been well answered by the experts. Now, I request all the experts who want to directly talk, all the attendees who want to directly talk to the experts can put on their hands. They can raise their hands through the interface. I'll be connecting you directly to the experts over here. So I would like to see some of the hands raised through the interface. Yeah, we have Shrutika Rajput. So I have given you the right, Shrutika. Can you unmute yourself and put up the question? Shrutika Rajput. Are you there? Shrutika? I can see Samir Hussain. Samir, I have given you the rights. Would you like to put in your question? Samir? Okay. So for the time being, I will take up the questions which are coming in the textual form. It's the next is coming from Radhika Sharma. Radhika wants to know why India is depending on the countries like Saudi Arabia, and USA for oil import. Why don't we distribute our import?
Well, this is not true, actually. Saudi Arabia indeed is one of our largest supplier of the oil. There are two or three things. When you're buying the oil, you have to, or any of these kind of assets, you have to look at reliability of supplies. That is most important. Then you have to look at the cost, that whether it is cheaper to import from which country. Then you have to see that what are your relations with that country, that just for a small thing they will not disrupt, as it happened in 1973, if you remember. So with Saudi Arabia, we have today excellent relations. We always had it. But earlier, the relationships were more in the transaction way, like they will sell us oil on the market prices and this, that. Recently, if you remember last year, when the prices were really going high, and Prime Minister Modi spoke to MBS and he gave us a huge discount on the price. So we won't get. Similarly, US. Now, another thing is, it is also strategic in nature. You see, you tie down their stakes into your country. And Dr. Modi will understand this in that sense that when a country which invests into your country is tied down into your country's welfare. So that's why which are the two largest markets today for oil? Either Iran and, US and China. Yeah, US and China, India and China are the only two countries which are the biggest markets for the oil for these countries. So secondly, what we are doing is they are investing into your country. So you're getting reinvestment into your country. We are buying oil from not only from Saudi Arabia, we are buying oil from Venezuela as far back. We are buying oil from Iran, and now this time we have not been. We have to stop it because of the sanctions, American sanctions. We are buying oil from a little bit from Oman. We are buying oil from Africa. I was in Nigeria. 12% of our oil is imported from Nigeria. 90% of our gas is imported from Qatar. So you sign these long-term agreements. You see, that is very important for us, so that you have a price fluctuations are taken into account and assured supply. That's why it's extremely important. Same thing applies to the US. Today, US is the largest, becoming the largest producer of oil and gas, especially after the shale revolution in the country. You know, they have developed this technology. They are converting the shale into oil and gas, and they are supplying at competitive rates. So we have to, because we have no choice for next 30, 40 years, even though we are going on to renewable areas, for our own industry, it is important for us to have assured supplies of oil and gas for continuing growth of 7 to 8%. We need that. That is one of the reasons that we are so heavily invested in the oil economies.
Wonderful, sir. Thank you so much for the answer. And we have Priyanka Rihal. Priyanka, I'll be giving you the rights. Would you like to put up your question yourself? Priyanka Rihal. Priyanka, are you there? Please unmute yourself.
Uh,
Yeah,
Good
yeah.
afternoon. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Sir, I just want to know that we are listening from the last few years that Prime Minister is visiting many countries, and Middle East also. You have mentioned that he has visited. So I just wanted to know that this visit to these countries made a significant change, or we already had a very pleasant friendly relations with these countries.
You know, one line answer to your question is, I always say that openly, that Prime Minister Modi's foreign policy, if you were to single out, then his West Asia policy is the biggest success. I have mentioned that it started not only from the time that this government came to power in 2014, but I would say that it started off from 2008, more so. Because the problem between India and these countries was that, as I said, buyer-seller relationship, right? So they produce oil, we buy oil, we need it. They need goods, we supply them the goods. So the strategic concept of it was missing, and Pakistan was also one of the factors. But what happened is that in 2008, when I was here, joint secretary in the Ministry for the Gulf and Hajj divisions, we realized that we have not had any visit to these countries at the highest level after Mrs. Indira Gandhi in 1982. Now you can imagine you are just 1.5 hours to 2 hours, 3 hours away. And in the Arab world, it is extremely important. And I mark my word, and I had told it to when I met the former brilliant foreign minister Sushma Swaraj, that you need to connect personally with these leaders. There has to be an interpersonal respect that works a lot with the Arabs. They are like us. We like to know each other. So that is extremely important thing that works with these countries. So when Dr. Manmohan Singh, as Prime Minister, we took him to Oman, we took him to Qatar, we took him to Saudi Arabia, and that was a sea-changing pattern. And when the Delhi Declaration or Riyadh Declaration was signed, you can see that for the first time, a country like Saudi Arabia that were blindly supporting Pakistan did talk about terrorism or against terrorism, because that has been our plan. And then they started giving us oil on preferential basis. Then Prime Minister Modi, when he came, what he has done is he has brought in interpersonal relationships to such a level that those countries consider India as their real strategic partner and a very important productive market. So that is what has happened by going through these visits. Otherwise, you know, for them, the world is there, right? But when they give a special preference to India, or the Indians for that matter, like today, when they are getting the people back, Indians are the preferential workforce, that they are dependable on them. They are looking at them. And that is one of the jobs that the Prime Minister also does when he goes to talk about the Indian welfare diaspora. So when he went to Palestine, When he went to Israel, when he went to UAE 3 times, we invited the UAE Crown Prince to come and be the chief guest on the Republic Day. He went to Saudi Arabia twice. He went to Iran. He went to Qatar. Now, in all these countries, we never had the visits before to several of them in many years. So when your prime minister of such a large country goes there, it conveys a message that we have an importance. So that's when in Iran, we developed the Chabahar port because we could not go through Pakistan. So Afghanistan is very important for us. We had to go via Iran. So we developed the Chabahar port. We have the North-South Transport Corridor. We are looking at Central Asia under our new policy. For that, Iran is extremely important. Tomorrow, Americans go out. Iran will again become important for you in Afghanistan. So this is why India is liked by all the countries. When there was a Qatar blockade by Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Egypt and Bahrain in 2017, the foreign ministers of Qatar and UAE came to India week after week to explain the situation. That India is our friend and strategic partner, and defense agreement we have with them. So India should support us. What happened is they said that we understand India's position. We only wanted to convey our concern, right? Today, earlier what used to happen is whenever there was a problem with Pakistan, you will see that they will be condemning India most of the time. Today, you don't have that. That is a direct result of these visits. Then you also see that whenever we needed any of these economic or these terrorist offenders and others from these countries, it has become far more easier to get them to India, right? So there are visible signs of delivery mechanisms. They have agreed to invest huge amounts into India. I mean, they already invested a great deal. They are doing a $40 billion refinery in Ratnagiri and all that. So these are some things which are of your direct interest. And I think that, and then G20, for example, Saudi Arabia was chairing the G20. India helped them a great deal. In the beginning, when they needed the assistance by way of PP kits and whatnot, India sent the rapid response teams to those countries. They bank on India. They depend on India. That is something which I believe has been a direct benefit from these visits.
Thank you so much, sir. And Priyanka would be grateful that she has got such an elaborate answer on her question. Thank you so much, sir. It's now over to Dr. PP Singh for the rest of the.
Thank you, Ambassador Anil sir. It seems as we were looking at the map and you were pointing out the country and you were talking, okay, this is the country, this is the history. So I'm still recalling my, मेरे को ये लग रहा है मेरे को ऑफिस में जाकर एक बहुत बड़ी दीवार पे एक बहुत बड़ा मैप लगाना पड़ेगा. I am already a fan of international relations, but you have made me just like that. आपके पास 4-5 क्लासें और लगानी पड़ेंगी. Mr. Anil sir, मजा आ गया आपकी बात सुन के. Now I formally invite again Dr. Vinod CV to give a formal vote of thanks to the expert panels.
Respected Anil Trigunai sir, Head of the Faculty Sanjay Modi sir, Head of the School PP Singh sir, Professor Rishi Chopra sir, it was really a privilege and honor for us to listen the words of wisdom from you, sir. It was just like a circle from, started from Iran, Iraq, Israel, Yemen. I think you have covered all the areas of Middle East, and it was really very wonderful. And really, we all got a lot of knowledge and new understanding and insight to the problems and issues and challenges. So thank you so much, sir. On behalf of the lovely professional universities and School of Humanities, I would like to express our sincere thanks from the bottom of our hearts, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much,
Ambassador.
Yeah. Dr. Sanjay Modi, sir, I was with you regarding the Ambassador Conclave. So Ambassador Anil Saab has already given us a few things. I'll be discussing with you after I have a discussion with Anil sir.
Wonderful.
तो एक बार इनको formally thanks और welcome दोबारा हम करेंगे.
I think it's a very good platform. You see, people who have got such practical experience, I think the knowledge these people can share, it is not available in the books. The perspectives that these people have of personal experiences, those are not available elsewhere. Some people could be biased because they know they have not seen the ground realities. These people have seen the ground realities. I think they are the best people to to educate us about the ground realities and give us the real picture. So wonderful idea to have people like, and the passion with which Anilji you speak is great, great. It is not only, you know, completing the lecture, but you know, the passion to give the maximum to the students, share the maximum is wonderful. You should now get into a professorship.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
sir.
Thank you very much.
Sir.
It's a
Thank
great
you,
pleasure.
Sanjay Modi, sir, for sparing your valuable time, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Rishi. Thank you, Dr.
Please
Vinod.
stay safe and take care.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you, sir.